There's two positions specifically that we are going to be focusing on for the first wave of free agency for the Minnesota Vikings. That is, of course, offensive guard and wide receiver. Now, offensive guard is the biggest need for the Vikings this offseason, and we all know that going into this offseason. But realistically, the position we have to look at first is wide receiver, because this wide receiver free agent class is very deep for the NFL right now. I mean, yes, there's Allen Robinson, there's Kenny Galladay, there's Will Fuller, there's Chris Godwin. There's so many players out there for this free agent market that there is a lot of sleepers that the Minnesota Vikings need to look at right here. Now, why should the Minnesota Vikings take a wide receiver in free agency? You might ask yourself, because yes, Minnesota Vikings may have moved on from Stephon Diggs, but we still have one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL when it comes down to it. With Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, they have created an amazing wide receiver duo right there. Both can play on the slot, outside. They are two amazing wideouts. You look at the rest of the Minnesota Vikings depth when it comes to the wide receiver position, and yes, Chad Beebe had a good season, but all in all, if Adam Thielen gets injured again, we're screwed. Adam Thielen got injured a couple seasons ago. Chad Beebe was injured a couple seasons ago. B.C. Johnson and Justin Jefferson is not going to cut it, especially when we're going to lose Kyle Rudolph, one of the best pass catchers in the red zone. Now, assuming that we do cut Kyle Rudolph or find a way out of his contract, this will screw up the Minnesota Vikings offense. And Dalvin Cook, too, he's also injury prone. There's a lot of injury prone players that we have right here who, if these players get injured, we can't manage to win. And we need that next up starter, that wide receiver 3 who is willing to play snaps on every game and get a lot of targets. Because these wide receivers were not getting very many targets outside of Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And let's take a look at it right now. If we look at our depth right here, taking away, of course, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, who are clear number 1 and 2, we have B.C. Johnson, who started the first 2 games in the NFL for the Minnesota Vikings, where Justin Jefferson earned the starting role week 3 against the Titans, where the reason why B.C. Johnson did start the first 2 weeks for the Minnesota Vikings is because we had no idea what Justin Jefferson could do at this point. There was no preseason. There was no training camp because of COVID. Justin Jefferson did not have a chance to prove himself. And that's when the Minnesota Vikings started second-year player, 7th-round draft pick, B.C. Johnson. Now, he had a great rookie season, but this year did not look very well. Now, he had 14 receptions for 189 yards. He also did have that 2-point conversion. B.C. Johnson also suffered with a few drop passes, and he's a good player. I mean, he played all right. He did start the first 2 games where he didn't look that good. And then outside of that, we had Tajay Sharp, who the Minnesota Vikings took last year, 2020, from the Tennessee Titans in the free agency. He didn't get a single reception all year. He had 3 targets. And by the way, those 3 targets, they were all catchable passes that was thrown to him. I know week 1, they went to him on like 4th and 3. I don't know. They tried to use Tajay Sharp, and Tajay Sharp just did not work in this Minnesota Vikings offense. He was cut by the team by the end of the season, and now is with the Kansas City Chiefs, where Kansas City Chiefs can use anybody at wide receiver at this point. I mean, they're possibly going to lose Sammy Watkins to free agency as well. Yes, they have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, 2 of the best receivers in the game. But when it comes down to it, and we saw in that Super Bowl, their depth at wide receiver is not very good at all. Just like this Minnesota Vikings team right here. And then Chad Beebe. Now, Chad Beebe, we're going off of the depth at the start of the Minnesota Vikings team, where B.C. Johnson was our wide receiver 2. Tajay Sharp was our wide receiver 4. Chad Beebe was our wide receiver 5, where he got 20 receptions for 201 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, Chad Beebe had a great season for the Minnesota Vikings, and I love what I see from him. He was an undrafted free agent for the Minnesota Vikings, and we didn't get to see a whole lot from Beebe up to this point because, of course, he did suffer with injuries, which he took the slot role by the end of the season. Outside of that, we had KJ Osborne and Dan Chisena, who also had 0 receptions on 0 targets. Now, I think KJ Osborne did have a reception, but it was brought back because of a penalty. So the reason why we have obviously KJ Osborne on this list, now he was a rookie out of Miami who was a 5th-round draft pick. The reason why he was drafted so high in the 5th round was not because of his talent at the wide receiver position. It was because he was such a good special teams returner in college, coming out of college. Now, all in all, he had a terrible season when it comes down to special teams return, wide receiver game, everything. And we need to look for a new special teams returner. And that's why this Minnesota Vikings free agency, we need to get an already developed special teams returner. So let's take a look at who the Vikings need for the wide receiver position, for that wide receiver 3. Now, we're looking at first wave of free agency here, and they need speeds and yards after contact. I guess technically yards after catch because it is a wide receiver. So speed and yards after catch is 2 big things when it comes to slot wide receivers and when it comes to those wide receiver 3 roles. And also, We need to look at someone who can play in special teams return game, because the Vikings right now, Amir Abdullah is a free agent, and this is after KJ Osborne was inactive by the end of the season, where he looked bad on special teams. Chad Beebe didn't look good on special teams. We need a new special teams returner, because this set the Minnesota Vikings offense back. On top of that, someone who costs under $11 million annual salary. Now, of course, this is pretty much above average when it comes to the wide receiver 3 role, but if they can do these first two things, paying him under 11 million or paying him at 11 million would be acceptable for the Minnesota Vikings team, and also someone who's, you just put on like a 2-year deal and then 1 year guaranteed of that. And person who we're going to look at first, and this is because I really need the Minnesota Vikings, we are all looking for a new special teams returner. We have to look at the best to ever do it, Cordero Patterson, or the best kick returner to ever do it, who had played 16 games this last season, 85 touches, 364 total yards, and a touchdown. Now, most of those touches were as a running back, because obviously the Bears suffered with David Montgomery's injury and Tyreek Owen's injury. They were playing Cordero Patterson as a running back, which I kind of feel bad for Cordero Patterson, because someone should have told him sooner. If Cordero Patterson entered the draft as a running back, I think his career would be a lot better than it is right now, because he's very athletic. He's very fast. He might not be built as much like a running back, but as a running back is built today, he can catch and make yards after the catch. Now, Cordero Patterson, if the Vikings did use him, I wouldn't expect him to get 85 touches. Now, that's a lot for a wide receiver 3, but if the Minnesota Vikings do have him, I'd expect him to maybe get somewhere around 30 targets per game, or not per game, 30 targets on the year. And this would be very good for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, he had 35 kick returns where he had 1,017 total yards, or special teams yards, and then a touchdown. And his market value is under 10 million, where the Minnesota Vikings can definitely pay that. Bringing back Cordero Patterson, who was a past first round draft pick for the Minnesota Vikings, and since then he's had that 99-yard return touchdown. He has just been the best kick returner I've ever seen, and possibly the NFL league has ever seen. Cordero Patterson has been great on the special teams return game, and we could definitely use him. He's a player, if I were to pick one player right now that I watch around the league that I miss the most on our team, it is Cordero Patterson. And the reason why I miss him so much, it's just, Daniel Carlson too, just because of how good he's doing and how bad we're looking on. All of our special teams players, they just don't look good. Our current special teams players and our past one look good, like Cordero Patterson, like Daniel Carlson. Next up, we're going to take a look at Keelan Cole. Now, Keelan Cole, he is a player that I think, we're taking a look at 3 players here, and he is the most likely that the Minnesota Vikings do sign. I think the Jags will move on from Keelan Cole. Now, yes, he was a very good player for them, but with James Robinson out there, with DJ Chark, I think they're going to bring in a new wide receiver possibly in the second round. Maybe Brashad Perriman, player out of Minnesota. Keelan Cole's a player I do think that they're going to lose. Now, he is 28 years old. He played all 16 games this last season, where he had 55 receptions, 88 targets on 642 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he had an amazing season with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think if he comes to the Minnesota Vikings team, he will be utilized very well. I think being a wide receiver 3 for the Minnesota Vikings, I think Keelan Cole will be utilized a lot. Maybe 55 receptions again. Now, that's a lot for a wide receiver 3, although he was a wide receiver 2 technically there. Now, they do have Laviska Shenault, who also is developing into that wide receiver 2 role. So, really, the Jaguars don't need Keelan Cole, and I think they will lose him to free agency, and he's a player the Vikings have to look at right now, and not to mention the fact he is also a kick and punt returner, where he had 220 return yards and a touchdown. That touchdown was against the Green Bay Packers. If you watch that game, it was a pretty interesting game. Now, the Green Bay Packers ended up winning that game because Devontae Adams had something like 3 touchdowns, but anyways, his market value is under 10 million, where we'd like to see it. So, if there's one player right now, when you look at this first wave of free agency, out of anywhere in the NFL that the Minnesota Vikings are most likely to get, it is Keelan Cole. Now, yes, the player I want to see the Vikings get the most is Brandon Sheriff, right guard out of Washington. But the player I think that the Minnesota Vikings are most likely to get is Keelan Cole. He's a special teams returner. He'll take the role immediately. There's not much competition there. We won't have to bring back Amir Abdullah. We won't have to see any more of KJ Osborne. Chad Beebe, we won't have to see him play in the punt return game and risk him getting injured all the time as well. So Keelan Cole, being a special teams returner, fits perfectly into the Minnesota Vikings right there. And then outside of that, as a wide receiver 3, you can play him on the outside, play him on the inside. He is perfect for the Vikings. Now, this last player we look at, this is mostly wishful thinking. This is a player, I think, this is a player who every team, if he does hit the free agent market, which I don't think he will, every team will be looking for him, and that is Curtis Samuel. Now, Curtis Samuel is coming off of his rookie contract where he is only 25 years old, played 15 games this last season where he had 112 touches. 112 as a wide receiver 3. Now, yes, a lot of it was playing as a running back technically where he did run with the ball. Now, I mean, it usually wasn't lined up as a running back, but where he did rush. So 112 touches as a wide receiver 3. When you have an offense with, obviously, okay, there is Christian McCaffrey, but we're not going to count him because he was injured for most of this season. When you have an offense who has Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore as your wide receiver duo, and then Curtis Samuel also on there, and he's getting 112 touches, I mean, you could not give more firepower for Teddy Bridgewater. And this is why the Carolina Panthers went all defense in the 2020 draft. They had so much firepower on offense for Teddy Bridgewater to succeed that Curtis Samuel is a player they might lose. I think that they're going to franchise tag him, though. I think given 112 touches, Curtis Samuel, he wants to stay with the Carolina Panthers. I think it's just given that he does with 1,051 yards and 5 touchdowns on top of that. I mean, he just had a phenomenal season, and I think Curtis Samuel is going to stay with the Carolina Panthers after a season like that. But if he hits this free agent market, a lot of teams are going to be looking to him. One of those will be the Minnesota Vikings, where we could definitely use him. And he's not their starting kick and punt returner, but he has done it kick returner, but he has done it in the past where in the 2017 and 2018 season, he had a combined 20 kick returns for 430 return yards. Now, that's not that great. I mean, 20 kick returns for 430 is not the best, but when it comes down to it, Minnesota Vikings could use him. He would definitely take the immediate kick return role for the Minnesota Vikings. We wouldn't have to bring back Amir Abdullah, and this would be huge for the team. Chad Beebe would still be our punt returner, but once again, this would be a great signing for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, his market value is at $12.4 million, where I don't know if the Vikings would be willing to pay that much. Like I said earlier, I think that under $11 million would be about where the Minnesota Vikings should be looking for a wide receiver 3. 12.4 is just too much. Now, I know it's not that much more than $11 million, but at the same time, Curtis Samuel, I don't know how he would fit into this Vikings offense. Now, yes, he's a player that we don't have. He's a player that could definitely be used. He's an all-around player. You can use him as a running back, use him as a wide receiver. When I say running back, I mean you can use him for rushing yards as well. And Curtis Samuel, he's very fast. He's very athletic. He's great after the catch as well, like I said, and he can play in special teams. But really, he won't fit as well as Keelan Cole will fit into this offense. Now, assuming that Clint Kubiak runs the same offense as Gary Kubiak, I just don't expect Curtis Samuel to come play for this over Carolina, because Carolina is where he's going to get all the targets in the world, even with the offense that has DJ Moore and has Robbie Anderson. So, all in all, we have Cordero Patterson, Keelan Cole, and Curtis Samuel. Now, the best player on this list, no doubt, is Curtis Samuel. But the player that I think the Vikings should be looking at the most is Keelan Cole. Cordero Patterson, yes, he's the best kick returner, the best special teams returner on this list, and can definitely do it for the Minnesota Vikings. But can he be utilized much in the pass game? Because we've seen throughout Cordero Patterson's career, he is not good as a wide receiver. Yes, he's made some good plays. You can give him those screen passes where he can rush for 10 yards, or run for 10 yards after the catch. Because he has the speed, he has the mobility, he can cut back. He's everything you wanted a running back to really be. If he was a running back in college, and if he entered the draft as a running back, I seriously think he'd be a starting running back still to this day and one of the best in the NFL. If he was a running back in college and has done it in the past. Because he's built like it and he plays like it. As a wide receiver, I do think the Vikings could use Cordero Patterson. Would he be a wide receiver 3 is the real question, because I don't even think he's better than Chad Beebe when it comes to the pass game, or even BC Johnson. He'd probably be somewhere on the wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 on the depth chart. So I don't think the Vikings should look at Cordero Patterson, while Keelan Cole will be immediate wide receiver 3 and could work his way into possibly a wide receiver 2 if Adam Thielen gets injured, or if we move on from Adam Thielen. Now, he is an aging player. We obviously don't see any decline from Adam Thielen so far, but once again, he is an aging player, and he could be gone in a few seasons where they could transition into Keelan Cole, and we could have a duo with Keelan Cole and Justin Jefferson, and this would be good for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Curtis Samuel is a player who is going to be a wide receiver 2 wherever he goes. I think he will. He can't be with the Minnesota Vikings. I just don't see Curtis Samuel working with the Vikings. Now, of course, he can make plays wherever he goes, but once again, I think the Vikings just should look to signing Keelan Cole. He's a player that would work well with the Minnesota Vikings. Let me know what y'all think.